We had a very poignant morning yesterday talking about the state of things and the state of our humanity and about our, irrevocable and invisible connections that we have everywhere. And our forest is such an incredible reminder of that. They are our body in another form. Our breath, what becomes us, is made by them. We do not exist without them. We're a system. We don't begin and end here. We're part of a really, really big and exquisite pattern. And that's a pattern that is very challenged on the planet right now. And so Trav and I, in our intention of pulling together the downshifting revolution, was really responding to what feels like to us, and I think to many people, that we've hit tipping point. Tipping point in awareness of the very, very dramatic changes that are coming and that we are already seeing. These changes have been going on for a long time, and they've been champions of change for a long, long time, including permaculture pioneer David Holmgren, who from the early 70s was saying we need to radically shift our ways. But it's only now that we've really, I think, globally hit tipping point. Things are really obvious. And finally, myself, as someone who's known about climate change since I was 5 or 6, and have never really felt there's been a critical mass to be able to speak into the space to say, come on, let's get together, let's really make the change. That has shifted this year for me. I suddenly feel like I'm in a big community, and a powerful community who don't know what they are. They're wavering in this intense space of deep grief and fear, but also the sense of unbelievable potential for the human race and for our fellow travellers, other species. It feels like there's the chance for everything to change, and really soon. In who knows in what way. So in the spirit of that poignancy, we wanted to gather together people every quarter to have really inspiring nights of extraordinary food, much of which was grown in people's gardens and from locally sourced. So thank you, everybody, to your exquisite gifts. Extraordinary speakers, and I haven't even introduced them yet. And then networking, conversation, a chance for us to resource ourselves, grow our skills, feel supported, get a hug, get a back rub, make new friends, and go out feeling clearer, stronger, sadder, wiser, more powerful in some way. So in the spirit of that, we are absolutely blessed to have two of the most innovative and creative and courageous people I have ever met, and feel very, very lucky to call dear friends. I met these two when Patrick wrote me a letter when he read my book, The Comfort of Water, which I wrote about walking from the sea to the source of the Yarra. He wrote a letter which ended up becoming the last chapter of his PhD. And I wrote him a long letter back of about 10,000 words. We're both writers. He read the whole thing, the darling. And that became the start of my PhD. And we have been talking ever since. And then with Meg and with my partner James, we've been going back and forth between each other's houses and loving what we co-create in the space between us. So it is my absolute joy to bring these people here into my community and invite you all to get to know them a bit better. They have, if you read the introduction, you know they've done so many amazing things, including riding from Dalesford to Cape York and back with 2 kids and a dog on bicycles, and foraging for food along the way, and having so many different adventures and meeting with First Nations peoples, and so many wonderful things. I won't say anything more about that. I'm going to start by asking a question, probably of Meg, I think, to ask a little bit about what life is like at Tree Elbow, which is the place where they live. What makes their days, their weeks, their seasons? Tell us a bit about that.
Can I just first say thank you for having us here tonight. We live in Dalesford, and we have many nights like this where we invite guest speakers, or we have film nights and things like that, community dinners where people talk, and it's always such richness that is left behind in the community. So thank you for inviting us here tonight. Thank you, Maya. So we live on Jajuarong country. We have a 1/4 acre in Dalesford, on the edge of town, on the edge of the bush. Just wanted to touch on something that you said in your acknowledgement of country, where you were talking about the gestures that we make every day to attempt to belong. And I feel like every day for us is trying to unlearn where we've come from, to hold dear where we've come from, to learn the seasons, to learn more sounds of what we can hear, the bird sounds in the morning, the water, the wind, the people, lots of trying to emplace and trying to belong. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes struggling, just the tension of living on land that was never ceded. And how do we belong to a land that doesn't belong to us? How do we make home? How do we belong to a place like that with the tension in mind? And every day I feel like the answer and the conversation is different. Sometimes what we do is dictated by the volunteers that we have on our property. We've been on it was a vacant block when we moved there 10, 11, 12 years ago. We've had volunteers for the last 10, 11 years. So sometimes it's dictated by the knowledge of what people want to learn, the knowledge that they hold and that they bring. Sometimes we're homeschooling. We've got 2 boys, Woody, who's almost 7, and Zephyr, who's 17. So what's happening for them, if it's play dates, or sometimes it's what's happening seasonally, what desperately needs to be done in the garden. In the warmer months we get 10 litres of raw local milk, so sometimes that arrives and we have to make cheese and yogurt and milk kefir and things like that. Sometimes it's someone bringing a dead animal that they've hit with their car or they've found on the side of the road, and that needs to be processed. So depending on what is happening in the world, yes, on a bigger picture, because I feel like to live just a very small country life, I don't want to use the word parochial, but it's in conversation with what is happening on a larger, out in the world, as you were saying, the horror and the joy of it, and trying to make sense of it, trying to not make sense of it, trying to just ignore it and just live our lives as best we can and as honourably as we can in the world. We give a lot of time to different volunteer groups. Might talk about that a little bit later on. I think that's enough for the moment. I could go on.
You could go on for days. So you do your work from home. I'm wondering, who would like to speak to that?
I'll just say a little bit, and then if you want to.
Both monetary and non-monetary, and how you're challenging those.
So we decided about a decade or so ago that we were going to prioritise time over money. So we have tried to put in place lots of systems and lots of structure in our lives to enable that. So every time we were talking about this the other day, every time we spend money, it's so we don't have to spend money. So we're saving up for water tanks, and then we can catch more rainwater, so then we don't have to. Usually at the end of summer we can go back onto mains water. So sometimes we have to do that in the dry months. So I work 2 days a week for David Holmgren, the co-originator of Permaculture, and his partner Sue Dennett, in the office doing communications and publicity. They also have a publishing house, so I work for them doing all kinds of communication kind of work. We have a very small cottage that Patrick built from reclaimed materials that's on Airbnb. We wrote a book, we get some money from that. We have house and garden tours, bit of income from that, sort of piecemealing things together. But we try to earn as little as we can just to get by. I think I need to talk about that.
Well, I'd like to just backtrack a little bit and say thank you also for having us here tonight, and also thank you to all the food makers and preppers and all the hard work that went into such a delicious and nourishing meal. So thank you. I think Maya was saying that Sue Dennett said to her at this last gathering that geez, the food's got better over the years in the environmental movement. Yeah, we are really blessed to be so frugal and living on the smell of an oily rag, but really eating the best food available every day. I think that's the home economy. There's the possibility of the home economy by saying no to those big brutal economic forces that we're born into, and it's normal, and that is a brutal ideology that we don't know is an ideology. An ideology is anything alternative in our culture, unfortunately. But so the big hidden ideology that has such a forceful agenda for our lives. It's so wonderful to take our lives back, to get to a stage where the home economy is not just a return of men and women and those who identify other back into the home place. And just to segue there for a moment, men were first exiled from the home economy and sent down the mines, and it's a really big story to bring men back into the home economy as well. It's a problematic story to talk about women in the home economy because there's been such great attending to what I call a gender lopsidedness, or a non-gender distributed culture, an oppressive culture. So to radicalize the home economy for all people to find their power in the singular, serving the collective, is such a place not to understate the incredible empowerment of the home economy and how that feeds into the community economy. These are belonging economies, which the dominant economy is not about belonging. It's the opposite. It's about alienation. So so I particularly want to acknowledge, I guess, those who identify as masculine coming back into the home economy. I think that's important work in terms of healing, in terms of culture, in terms of economy. Not to feel that we have to be to wear these masks in that dominant space.
Can I interrupt? Can I just interrupt? I would like to acknowledge all the how difficult it is for women to come back into their home place and to say, this is where I want to be. A woman's place is in the home, and that's okay. A man's place is in the home too, and that's also okay.
Yeah, I was just really struck by what you said, you know, that coming to the singular but to the collective. It's like, just because it's not retreating to the home, but it's making home as a site of culture that then means that every house is a hub of knowledge and learning and art and creativity. And I think that's really where I'd like to sort of ask my question is, you call yourself artist as family. You don't, not Megan, Patrick and Zeph and Woody and so forth, but artist as family. I'd love to hear some of your playfulness and investigations and politics in that title, because it's so interesting.
Yeah. It came about maybe 10 years ago. I was invited to do an artist in residency, and Zeph was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, our only child at that point. And I just was starting to question what the point was of going away from the family where so much creative life was taking place, and to go and do this alienated residency somewhere else. And so I was really challenging the art world and what the art world is and what culture is. And so those conversations led to conversations in my mind with Meg, and out of that Meg and I said, well, let's just start our own practice called Artist as Family. And it was very much inspired by what Zeph was doing as a child, and how we could, just even the way that we were learning to forage again, we were learning all the edible weeds, and so long walks through the town and into the sort of novelty ecologies on the edge of town, which had become very much part of our belonging economy, that interface between old Jarrah biota and newcomer biota, and all our ancestral medicine and sacred plants such as hawthorns and oaks and blackberries. And I'll get to that too, because that's a very big, complex and story to unpack. But just loving living on that marginal space, marginal place between the town and the Wombat Forest and its utter indigenous nature in terms of Jarrah indigeneity. And then these sort of thresholds or zones, I guess permaculturists would call them. And so watching Zeph and his mates play and build cubbies and build home in those places, and learn about mushrooms and learn about what's edible and how to not just identify edible weeds and feral foods, but how to actually incorporate them into a diet and actually want to go out there and bring more in. So I guess Artist as Family came about by this sort of critique of Western art industry and looking at how the home and children can inform creative practice in the sort of rebuilding of of cultural regenerative culture. I guess that's the nub. Like, children are the natural playmakers. They are the natural homemakers in a way. They make homes anywhere they go, cubbies out of indoor furniture, and so I think much like our practice has very much become, what is the forest saying? Should we go down the route of incorrect and correct species and this sort of bureaucratic template on new and old biota, or should we actually look and see what the non-humans are doing and what they're trying to tell us? It's the same with children. And I think that response, that sort of giving over the adult ego to pure observation, or just and playful observation and engagement. I don't know what I'm saying really.
Well, I mean, all of that is very exciting to me as someone who did my permaculture course 25 years ago and has been thinking about this ever since. You know, permaculture, it was more than that. I was 20 and I was an architecture student, and my housemate brought out this permaculture, Bill Mollison's permaculture manual, and I opened and I went, this is my life. This is it. It's this. And you call your practice Permapoesis. You know, it's exploring what permaculture could be in so many different spheres, and permanent culture. It's like this. It's the softer side. You know, we had David Holmgren here 3 months ago, and this is permaculture too, but this is a different approach to, but just as sophisticated and complex as his, but a really different kind of thing, because you're coming from sort of art world, he was coming from sort of, I don't know, what was it? Science and so forth. Yeah. And what's really lovely to me, I think, is just how different professions can make permaculture such a vivid and vital lens, if you like. And that's really what I see.
Well, I think that's the credit to David. He actually not only says you can don't stop with permaculture. Language needs to be fluid. It needs to be changing. Don't hold on to that. And I think people do get put off by things when they become brands. And so for us, we just keep moving the language. And I guess we're feeling pretty confident with neo-peasantry, or permaculture neo-peasantry, because really that identifies that we're making a choice to live like this, rather than we're born into peasantry. We're educated middle-class Australians. So, but at the same time, we're really deeply taking our elders and our ancestors seriously, and we're taking seriously the traumatic point at which that eldership was brutally traumatized, and of course all carry that trauma still with us generations later. There's a wonderful British agricultural historian called Joanna Thirsk, I think, and she speaks of English peasant culture prior to the 1750s, which is where all the medical records go back to. And so when progress pundits say, you know, everyone was a miserable, stinking, impoverished peasant, you know, the medical records show, well, the peasantry was so smashed by the middle of the 18th century, so utterly and totally smashed of their culture. Thanks. So there's our old people it's not the same level of trauma. I'm not meaning to collapse that Indigenous people in Australia have suffered, but it is true that the British elite practiced colonialism on their own people before they rolled it out across the world, and the world is still suffering for that, whether it be Spaniards in South America or the British in Australia. We're in 1 billion pieces, and there's so much work to do to put to heal that violence. For all of us have that work to do. I don't know how I got there, but
fantastic.
We followed you.
Thanks.
I mean, this is something that's both absolutely central to our works and our thinking. That if you don't acknowledge that trauma, there's this gaping shadow that means it's almost impossible to look at anything straight. You can't, you hear a word peasant and you go, oh, wrong, or inferior, or weak, or stinky, or
which is true for us.
Short-lived. I love your smell. I came into my little room after you'd been in there. It's delicious. It's real, and but it's this thing of, without understanding where we've come from and the enormous dislocation and trauma that went on in Britain and Ireland and Scotland, and that is the culture that has perpetuated scientific reductionism and so forth onto the whole planet. That and Germany and other places where the violence against their own people was catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. And that is still not understood nearly enough. And until we understand that, it is very hard for us to be able to work around all of these different terms and to be able to really understand that culture can come from the country. You know, there is this, there's a complete presumption in Australia so strongly that it's all about the urban and the city, and that anything from the rural or the peri-urban or whatever isn't there's no real art, there's no real culture, whereas we feel that's actually the opposite. That's where there's real generativity, because that's where people are close to nature, and nature is the most alive and vibrant teacher. I mean, that's just one point. There's so many other reasons why it comes from those places rather than from the centres where the only mirror is more human, and the only things you see are the made things, and then you're boxed into a world of your own making. And you know, this is something we've spoken of. I know that there's a number of amazing homeschoolers in this room, and I reckon they'd love to hear a bit more, maybe from you're working not just with Woody but with other people, and this is the exciting things of, you know, your home is a site of culture, but there's lots of sites of culture through your region, and you working together and bringing that out. I'd love to hear a little bit on that.
One of the reasons why we homeschooled our older boy Zeph, he wasn't a good match for the schooling system. One of the reasons why we homeschool Woody is because we don't want him to be a good match for that mainstream system. And it's funny because Zephyr really wanted to go to school, but he just wasn't cut out for it. And we don't want Woody to go to school, but he actually is really cut out for school. I think he'd flourish in that environment. We feel that the skills that this generation needs to go forward, to deal with the world that they will inherit, to deal with the trauma that they have inherited, that the lessons that they need to learn are not found inside classrooms, they are found outside, in the home, in the bush, in the community, being quiet with themselves if that's what they feel like doing, being social with other kids if that's what they feel like doing, taking their shoes off, going for a walk in the creek. We have, over the last few years, Patrick has run 2 bush schools, one called Make 'em Play for younger kids, one called Feral and Free for older kids. That's been a really big thing for us to try to bridge the gap between the schooled kids and the homeschooled kids. When Zephyr was younger, there was a really wonderful homeschool network. And they come and go in our area. I know there's a really strong one up here. I was talking to Priya before. Lucky you. At the moment, we have one kid who's Woody's age, he's almost 7, who's homeschooled 2 days a week, this other boy. So that's really wonderful for us for those 2 days. We have lots of other kids who Woody hangs out with. They're all younger than him and not quite school age. and we have lots of volunteers, so there's lots of interactions and things like that happen. And just for him to be bored, for him to be entertained, for him to be excited, for him to decide what he's going to do within the context of what's happening in our family, our sort of regular working days.
I think with the homeschool network is quite in a low ebb at the moment, and Daylesford is real estate wise in a very high price point, and so parents are really stretched. There's at least 1.5 parents that are out working, and so and that's really only happened in the last decade. Quite a number of our friends have had to have left the area because of expensive real estate. We've had a lot of professional retirees move up to Daylesford and buy their property and a second property and maybe a third property to rent out and I guess service their trips to Florence each year. I'm not sure exactly. But unfortunately that has a huge social cost, and so I sort of feel that just keeping the possibility of homeschooling or home educating or unschooling, whatever families whichever family calls it what, is sort of our task at the moment, just to keep the seed ready for its next flourish. At the same time, really just making sure that Woody's bonded friends, his little friends who most of which have gone off to school, that he has many opportunities with them. He is a very independent little neo-peasant who is very happy spending long periods of time in the forest making things, and incredibly adept carver. He's had knives and axes available to him since he was about 1 or 2. Just a very different kid who, it's not a inspiring story, is what I guess we're trying to say at the moment. It is a story of adaptation and constant changing and making sure that that a little kid isn't isolated in his community. And so I guess that's why the bush schools for the little ones and now the sort of pre-teens have been taking place to bond all those kids who are interested to that sort of marginal forest ecology that runs around the town in these beautiful little spaces where we can learn the medicinal and wild foods of our cultural past, and at the same time learn about Jarrah culture and food and medicine. And this sort of lovely interweaving of these species. I started my environmentalism as a Wombat Forest activist in the Kennett years. I was really politicized by what Kennett was doing to the forests. But then I was sort of realizing not only did I have unproductive levels of anxiety, but I was going to the supermarket to buy my food at the end of a long forest campaign. And so, that all roads led to permaculture after that. And so, but I'm very, very interested in this problematic dualistic relationship between biodiversity and permaculture. And I feel like it's really time that we grew up out of those camps. And we really understood that, of course, indigenous biota is sacred. But the newcomer species that have arrived and are in placing and are providing habitat, such as the hawthorn in our area is a dominant habitat tree for ringtail possums. They build their drays in them, and just in the forest near us, there's 30 drays in hawthorns. And traditionally, I think Bassaria would have been in, or you know, a small prickly tree would have been the tree that ringtails would have been drawn to. But in the gold rush, which again is this sort of trauma event that we're still living with, wiped these ecologies out. They were just completely and utterly denuded, and blackberry came in, and then and things like holly and hawthorns and a plethora of other plants. But I've been really observing this, first as a forest activist and very sort of nativist in my approach, and then softening as I sort of realised, well, what happens if we become the biological controls of all this incredibly nourishing food that has a cultural relevance to us, that our ancestors, our old crones and witches and shamans would work with this material. Can we actually have these conversations on Jarrah people's country? It is one, you know, being in love with one cancelling out the love affair of another? I don't think so. And the other thing, I guess, with that is that before the sort of, you know, I was really interested in, as a forest activist, in traditional Aboriginal economy and how collectivized it is, and how sort of nothing's under lock and key in terms of economic lock and key. So those things have been the ethics of Jarrah and Indigenous economy has always been there. But then I think, well, that's exactly what a peasant economy is as well, a non-traumatized peasant economy.
Yes.
That, to be really clear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that well, I know I am, but I know conversations I've had with people is, how do we really become a good community? How do we learn to support each other? How do we become sites of culture in our homes? How do we join together to do things that we couldn't do alone? And move away from the system. I mean, that was the real challenge. I think many of you were here last when David Holmgren spoke. He really emphasised the importance of just stepping out of the mainstream economy. Just don't go to Coles, don't go to Woolies, divest from these things and make your own economic systems. Really does actually have an impact. And that really caught our attention, particularly, I think, Trav, that really sparked something for you, and we've started a food co-op since then. Trav has done that, and all sorts of different things. We've got the Blackwood Growers Co-op. We're doing a big growing plot on one of our neighbours who's got a lot of land, for 4 or 5 different families in our street. Love to hear, some of your experiences around there. You've part of the community garden, and also your non-economic model of education and running permaculture courses. You've run, how many permaculture courses have you run there? 2-week permaculture design courses?
9.
9 courses.
Yeah.
Love to hear something about the economies of that and the community building capacities of that and the networking.
So many questions.
I know.
So many answers.
So many answers, I know.
So we run,
What you're inspired to say.
so ordinarily if you want to know more about permaculture, you might do a 2-week PDC, a permaculture design course. Often they are 2-week intensive, residential and very expensive. You pay for accommodation and all organic food included usually, plus all the tutors and site visits and things like that. We decided not to do PDCs, but having lived permaculture and studied it on our own terms, we would start running PLCs, permaculture living courses, because when you do a PDC you might learn the principles and the ethics, but when you're finished, you might know how to design a settlement or a community, but you might not know how to put those, how do you live it? What does it look like up close? Every day I wake up, what does permaculture look like this morning? It's not theoretical, it's very practical. So people don't necessarily learn those skills at a PDC. So we were running permaculture living courses, so 2 weeks.
As complementary.
Yeah. A 2-week residential and non-monetary. So a kind of work exchange, work labour knowledge, sharing skills exchange. So we ran, is it 9?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, 9 of those in different seasons. So we can take 3 people at a time. So it's small, we've got some tiny houses. They're living with our family, and whatever we're doing for the day, that's what we do. So we have a list on the chalkboard of all the jobs that need to be done in those 2 weeks. And sometimes if people have preferences, if they want to build or if they want to learn how to make a bone broth or pickle cucumbers or whatever's in season, then we'll prioritise those things. But usually it's just whatever needs to be done first and foremost gets done. So we also, Patrick is the facilitator of our community gardens. We've got 5 community gardens in Dalesford, a very small town. And the hope with those is that everybody in the town will have a community garden in walking distance to them. So if they don't have, and also because there are so many B&Bs and hotels and things like that in our town, that people who are visiting can just walk to a community garden and drop off their compost to the compost bins, and take some herbs or whatever for tea, or veggies if there's excess, in exchange. So we have monthly working bees out the front of one of the community gardens that's sort of more central to town. There's a free food box, so excess produce gets put there, seeds. Also the local food bank puts tinned goods in there and packet goods in there, and it all sort of comes and goes. And the other day I was there, and a woman was putting some dryser bones that her kids had outgrown, and some slippers and knitted socks and things that she'd made. And I facilitate, it's called Culture Club. It's a group for fermenters, and we meet once a month, and that's been going 3.5 years. And we run workshops on cheese making. We just had a mead making, sourdough. We tee up with local farmers who grow us produce, especially for us to ferment. We have community pickling days, community kimchi and krauting days, and it's a lot of fun. And we're just about, and again, that's all free. And we're just about to start up a monthly, it's called Wild Fennel, and it's a herbal medicine group and a herbal group. Again, free, so I'm really looking forward to that.
We need to start a culture club, don't we?
Oh, definitely. I'll be nice.
Well, can I just give a plug tomorrow, Anna?
Which is sold out, but yes.
Oh, okay. Well, just so you know about it, not
There'll
that
be
you.
another one.
They'll have to be. They'll have to be.
So Anna, who's a local herbalist, hello Anna.
Anna's there.
Yeah. And I are running a medicine from your garden workshop tomorrow. So Anna's going to do the herbalism and stuff, and I'll do some fermenting things. And really trying to, in our town and probably in this town too, really trying to work on the knowledge commons, and really trying to build on that, and to be in service to your community is such a privilege, and to work on building community health and community strength and resilience, so we are all well, and so we can all help each other be well, is a really wonderful thing to be able to gift back to the community that supports us so beautifully. So we have about 80 different families that we barter, gift exchange, swap with, some more formally, and we sort of keep track of, well, here's 6 eggs and thank you for a jar of honey or whatever it might be. We'd liked it to be just much more of a flow of gifts. Sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes even with good friends we feel like we're keeping track of who's given what, and that's okay, because we're just learning how to live in this non-monetary world. Because when you have money, it's a clear-cut transaction, and as Patrick said before, it's an economy of alienation, and it's very good at clear-cut boundaries. And you don't even, if somebody gives you, if you buy some tomatoes from the supermarket, for example, you're not going to write a letter of thanks to the farmer. But if you're gifted tomatoes, you might write a letter of thanks if someone drops them on your doorstep to say, thank you so much.
Yeah, I like to think of the monetary economy as a debt economy, and the non-monetary economies as the indebted economies, so that we are actually bonded to one another, and that we have to be in relationship. It's a nuanced thing. So more formal exchange is with stingier people, or like, oh, I got a bit shafted last time. Let's make it quite clear cut this next time. And then the flow, as Meg said, the flow of gifts is just, it's unregistered because there's just a trust that we all have each other's backs, and it's those households that we're closer to. And but the formal, it's good to have formal barters as an intermediate between, say, the monetary and what we call the heart or more love economies, because it is you can't just flip from one to the other. So it is really great to have when you're just starting out, maybe some sort of economic exchange or skill exchange between households just to make it really clear. I'll come and teach you how to pickle carrots, because I really, and then I can show you how to prune trees or something like that, which, by the way, I'm running a pruning workshop tomorrow.
In my garden.
And again, so if people, one of the things that I've been planting fruit trees for probably 25 years, but it's only in the last 5 years have I really realized how incredibly important pruning is. And that I was one of the community gardeners that in his retirement, was a biodynamic orchardist called Ian Clark, who had gifted the last 3 or 4 years of his wonderful knowledge to the community gardeners, holding many workshops. And Woody and I became apprenticed to him. We sort of forced ourselves on him to learn. And he passed away just 6 months ago. And he, in his dying weeks, I thanked him for his knowledge to be passed on, and I said, I will continue to pass this on. And it's a really profound knowledge that he had built up over 54 years one of the things he used to say is, every tree has a will, and you have to understand the will of the tree that you're pruning. There's another thing he would say is that when you cut, you're cutting for abundance and against disease in the same cut. So if you're interested in some of Ian's wisdom, I'm going to allay some of it tomorrow.
10 till 12 at my garden. There's a note on the Yarra Valley Community for Climate Action page, but also just come up to me afterwards and I'll give you my address.
Also, when Ian died, we asked his widow Jeanette if we could have some of his ashes, and we had a beautiful ceremony, and we scattered them around some of the community trees that he looked after. It was very beautiful.
That's amazing. I'm wondering, would like to maybe finish up and open up for questions in a moment, but I just thought whether both of you would have a story of one of the most inspiring things that has come out of your choice to live in this way. What has been the sort of the most enriching and rewarding sort of harvest of that decision? I mean, it's a very big question, and you might think about it. You might think of the perfect story in a week or two. But if there's anything on the tip of your tongue around.
Yeah, I think I started, I guess, 12 years ago. My line of thinking and Meg's was slightly different back then, and it's slightly different now. Quite different, actually. But I really wanted to very aggressively say no to corporate life in my life. And so mine started as very political and very sort of, I am not serving supermarkets, I am not serving petrol giants, I'm not serving industrial culture, how am I going to do that? And what's been wonderful is that while that was my starting point, that through all the knowledge and relationships that had to be built, step by step, little incrementally, is that now it's just such a more fundamentally beautiful way to live. I was riddled with anxiety, and now I'm just riddled with worms. I mean, it's just and I welcome those parasites to a degree. Yeah, so I think just, I feel like in that process, not only have I have divested, we have divested radically from corporate Australia and the global monetary economy. It's not to say that we have any delusions about not being a part of that privilege and not, living on top of that incredible affluence and wealth. I'm not deluded about that at all, but we have dropped our monetary needs by 70% over 10 years. And we have much more time to be at home. We work hard. We still have a lot of friends who love to drop in and get inspired. We're saying, but this is our workspace. So that's a really, that's one of the more complex things is sometimes being a bit too far down the track in our transition. Like we as trying to inspire others to come with us on this and the urgency of it, but also the imperatives of it, the imperatives that we all have a responsibility in this, because we know that governments aren't going to address these things. Governments are not going to place limits on outrageous consumption. We know that. It would be fantastic if they did, because it would make our jobs much less pressure on those of us who really want to do something. But if I think what I'm starting to see now is the possibility of the under 1% living in that limited but yet rich way of living. The aggregation for that in the next 20 years to a 10%. And once we get to that 10%, things will radically shift culturally. But while
you mean 10% of people living like you?
Well, not like us in terms of clone, but certainly at that carbon level.
Yeah. Okay.
At that low carbon level, and yes, and the cultural resurgence that comes from that,
yes.
because you do things differently.
Yes.
Economy makes culture, and culture makes economy. So if we so how do we divest from that dominant culture? How do we divest from that dominant economy? That initially is such a difficult thing, but all of us take courage. It's like if you can't see it, you can't live it. If you can't,
you've got to see it to be it.
You've got to see it to know that it's possible. And so we're so thankful to have had Dave and Sue in our community as elders. And I feel like the rebuilding of eldership is such a big part of this story.
Yes. Beautiful. How about you, mate?
I think it's not the story I would like to tell is my life story. The quick version, the musical. I grew up in the burbs in Melbourne. When I moved to Daylesford 15 years ago, I didn't know how to save a single seed. I didn't know why anyone would mulch their garden or face their house to the north. I didn't know so many things. I grew up in Melbourne. We had an acre in the burbs. We had a big veggie patch. I was happy to harvest from it. I wasn't interested in learning anything about the soil or anything. And now I know a lot more than that. And I think a lot of people might not know how to start to turn their lives towards a place that's more in line with their values. And for me, it was so step by step and so gradual. But everything, so when we first got together, we both had full-time jobs. We both had cars. We both had mobile phones. We were both flying in aeroplanes if we wanted to, both shopping at supermarkets, both living a very carbon careless kind of way. And it feels like bit by bit, we have given up a lot, and we've tried to live much more in tune with the world's capacity, much more in tune with our values, much more in tune with the seasons, and with our community and with each other. And I mean, as you say, just the beauty of what is possible when you turn your back on destruction and you turn yourself towards honouring the world and honouring the life and honouring ourselves truly. Just what a beautiful, sounds so soppy, but it's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful way to live. It's a very beautiful way to want to encourage other people to live.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to finish this part of the night with a piece of music from Patrick and me.
We do.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, your guitar. Yeah.
So just recently in Daylesford we've had this thing called Goose Gate. I don't know if anyone's been following.
It was written in The Age about it. Some of you know.
So we had a new biodiversity officer who moved up to our area, and he's a lovely guy. But sort of brought, I guess, a bureaucratic approach to an environment. It's pretty extreme, really. And so it's divided the town, this issue of getting rid of the geese on Lake Daylesford. And Lake Daylesford is a imposed lake, or a whitefella lake, on the Wombat Creek. And so one of the things, I can understand his desire, and certainly many of us have the desire for black swans to come and breed on Lake Daylesford. And the geese in their population, because they've grown to like numbers of 40, were the dominant bird. But I've noticed in other parts of Australia, geese and black swans inhabiting the same waterlands, and in fact the same nest in Belgium 3 weeks ago, and documented 2 muscovy ducks, 1 widowed black swan who must have lost his or her partner, and 2 geese, all making the same nest under the Belgian River Bridge. And I emailed these off to with photos off to our new biodiversity officer, saying I totally would love to see black swans on Lake Daylesford, but I think it's a case of just needing more neo-peasants to start eating the geese rather than actually remove all the geese and displace them, really. So we pulled out a very old song from our poem, and we put it to music.
And we've changed some of the lyrics, as you'll hear.
woman who steals the goose off the cool and common, but leaves the greater villain loose, who steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the 10% all fine when they take things that are yours, mobs, or mine. The 90% don't escape if they conspire. The law to break this must be so, but they endure. Those who conspire to make the law locks up man, trans, or woman who steals the goose off the cool and common, but leaves us still a common back till they go and they steal it back. Up man, trans, or woman who steals the goose off the cool and common, but leaves the greater villain loose, who steals the common from the goose.
Patrick and Meg, I know you've made many of us want to come and move to Dalesford just so they can be around a community hub.
Wait, you have to wait till the next recession.
Or we can try and emulate what they have done here in the Yarra Valley and get together and create barter economies, create homeschooling communities, create creative relationships with our forest and the weeds that are there, and get behind our young people with their hunting and their fishing and their eeling and their really learn these skills well. We've got an amazing place where we could learn some of what you have done. So thank you so much for coming along and inspiring us with your beautiful stories. Pat has the first question.
So first of all, thank you both for sharing yourselves with us this evening. I wish that Dalesford, it feels like it's psychologically a lot further than it actually probably is, just because it's on the other side of the city, that I felt like really hard to get there. But hopefully, we'll get to make more connections between our two communities as well. It would be really great. But just inspiring each other is so important. Right at the beginning, Patrick, you said that the reason about the home economy and that it's the economy of belonging, and that the traditional economy is alienating. And I have to say that kind of made a question come up in my mind, because I feel like the perception and the reality for a lot of people is that being a homemaker full-time is extremely alienating and isolating. And that was my experience as well. And that going back to work was actually felt like, I'm back in the world. I feel like I belong here and I'm getting acknowledged, And so I really want to know, how do you make the home economy the economy of belonging? How do you change that?
Because it's
that
not...
doesn't seem to happen.
Great question.
Because, it's a great question. But I think that's the composting of the nuclear family. That's really the simple answer. Because to be alienated as one parent in a house is not the belonging economy. That is like everything loaded on that parent. So it's like how do we make it possible that everyone can stay at home if they wish to, but it's not just the nuclear family that we're living multiple generations, or we've got much like this environment here that's so obviously rich because of the interplay of many different cultural inputs into this land. This is not an example of the fenced off home. And while we're all, most of us have been born into that private retreat.
And that was very much one of the motivations for me to be doing it the second time in a community, like raising children with other people raising children, automatically less isolating.
Exactly.
But not many people can do that, like just practically,
Yeah, I think it's essential though. Like, however we do that, and it's okay. It's very easy as someone or people who have access to a quarter acre of Jarrah people's land in Daylesford, but it's private property ownership isn't the only way to do it, and collectives. I mean, for example, the goat hand co-op that we're in with 8 families, we're farming goats for fuel mitigation, climate era fuel mitigation and weed mitigation, as landless farmers in a way.
And you're farming on the commons.
And we're farming on the commons, illegally at the moment. We're doing trials with council at the moment, so we're sort of building some status for what we're doing, and we're certainly getting the community status. But this, for me, is a way also for shepherd's huts to start appearing on the commons, and that if we continue to do asset protection burning, which is what I call white fella burning, pesticide and mechanical treatment as the only ways of mitigating the weed cycles in going further into a climate change era, we're nuts, because all of those are highly fossil fuel dependent ways of treating land. The answer to the problem of the biomass, which is mainly edible weeds, woody perennial weeds that are really great for goats, and to converting and to growing herds and potential. We're not huge meat eaters. It's not about meat production, but there is the occasional boy does get taken out of the herd and shared amongst the families. But so.
How many goats just out of interest?
We're up to 16 goats now, with maybe 2 preggers. Preggers. That's such a.
And you milking them?
No.
They're not milking goats. Yeah, and the reason they're not milking goats is that the protein, you need extra protein, which so we're really trying to this whole farming and land management and community managed forestry. We're done without permission, but sort of begging for forgiveness after the fact. But at the same time, getting neighbours who are around these weed-infested wet gullies who are really panicked and have been trying to get council to do something about it for a decade. So it's doing this sort of community service, building our relationship to the herd and becoming a herd of people around the herd. There's some really beautiful things in that, and also the alienation of some of the neighbours who live by themselves, who have become kind of shepherds of the goats, and they have our numbers and they go out and engage with the goats. This is what happens when public land becomes something other than just to be to detox from your working life in the industrial military complex. And then so nature has to be this sort of pristine, restorative environment that we get in our Subarus and drive to, and get out our really expensive Pac-Man tents and experience nature. That model is so. We need to challenge those basic premises of what economy is, what biomes are, and how we fit into them. There's a lot of study, and I'm going on, but there's a lot of study to suggest around the world community managed forests. That's community extracting non-monetary value from the forests are the most biodiverse and the least fire prone. So there's a lot of scope for public land, that particularly marginal land councils don't really have the money to deal with, to start encroaching, and of course respectfully with local indigenous communities. Unfortunately, Daylesford doesn't have Jarrah people living in Hepburn or Daylesford. We've got Aboriginal friends from other countries living around us, and we're neighbours too. But so we're sort of almost in a vacuum in terms of direct dialogue with First Nations people. Yeah.
So goats is the answer. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's our answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for us.
Other question?
People are scared it's going to be another long answer.
How do you feel about water security in the future in central Victoria, trying to like live like a home economy, with like rainfall going to be a far more challenging thing there than even like areas like here in the Yarra Valley?
We're doing everything to drought proof. Yeah. All our 3 toilets are bucket compost toilets. We have swales in our garden. We like to say every time we invest, use money.
That's what I was saying before.
Yeah, to make ourselves less reliant on money. So, a water tank is if we're saving up for something, it's usually something like a water tank. So, incredibly water frugal.
We don't shower.
Yeah, we just don't shower. We swim in Lake Daylesford.
In the winter. In the snow.
Yes, last weekend in the snow. That was thrilling. Yeah, so I think just all the usual permacultural approaches to, but doing, yeah, so Daylesford will have Bendigo's climate by 2050. That's significantly drier. That's half our water within, 30 years. So we're very conscious of that. Gee, you have a lot of water here.
Yeah, I just wish I could get it off my body.
What's been your greatest challenge with this transition over the last 15 years?
Good question.
Feeling isolated?
Yeah, I think so.
Like having lots of friends and community that are really so caring and supportive, and not isolated in a social sense.
But a little bit of that for me.
Yeah, but isolated, not because we don't have friends, it's more that we've gone too far ahead too quickly, and you can't do this by yourself. It has to be, and so being frustrated with...
and impatient.
Yeah, for friends and community to...
Yeah.
Catch up, yeah.
Like we know the science. We don't need any more facts. We just need the action. Why aren't people acting? How can people still jump on planes and go overseas for holidays to lie on a beach? Those sorts of things. And I don't want to judge other people. We don't want to judge other people.
I don't want to go on a plane and get my teeth, like I've got holes all in my teeth. All my friends are going for dentistry over this. Like, oh, that's a good idea. I might just sort of take myself out of that life and just go to Bali and get my teeth done. Yeah, I think that's... Would that be... That's my biggest challenge, is doing it... Yeah, you've got to do it in community.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people doing great stuff in our community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just not quite enough.
yeah.
Not quite enough people.
I think there's still this belief that somehow governments will come to their senses, and I think when you hold on to that hope, it stops you from actually acting.
Also the hope that technology will save us. I think that's another, that
That's
whole green tech ideation. Yeah.
Can I just say, I was talking to a farmer, I work in the organic food industry, I was talking to a farmer the other day, and he said, I don't know about this climate change thing, it's been, my tanks and my dams have been full for 3 years. And I've been reading a bit on the stuff that we're talking about the complacency, and I said to you, I almost lost it over the phone, because I speak to this guy every week, we have a relationship, and I said, look, the thing is you think it's happening everywhere else, and you think because it's not happening to you right now, it's not going to happen. And it was just startling, that mindset. And so waiting for this catch-up thing, it's just mind-blowing.
He needs to have a holiday at a farmers' convention in New South Wales and southern Queensland.
Yeah, it was just, I couldn't believe it for someone who's been farming on the land for, more than 2 decades.
And that's a constant thing of like 3 good seasons. It's still, this is still weather. It's not climate. And just that confusion between, just what those two things are. They're very different.
Well, the organic food industry is changing. I've noticed it a lot this year. Yeah, so people will get a feel for it pretty soon, I reckon.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Maya.
Is that the last? No more questions? Well, it's not the last chance to talk to Patrick and Meg, because we have tea and cake and mulled wine and conversation. So the way Downshifting Revolution is structured is to have networking at the end. Networking over our lovely Stand.